Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Shia City podcast. I'm with Sheikh Bilal. I'm your host for today, Hashim Shah. Sheikh Bilal, let's get started. Valentine's Day just passed.
Boy, you're really getting into it, huh?
Yeah. So Valentine's Day just passed. Can we talk a little bit about the topic of love and Islam?
Okay. So, all right. Islam believes in love, right? There's this old puritanical ideology that exists in West that religion is separate from love. And the church was very prominent in pushing this idea of, for example, celibacy is a sign of faith and love is not. And love is something that's a natural human limitation, and exceed that limitation of love is to be religious. Islam doesn't believe in this. Islam does believe in the concept of love, and Allah even addresses it, right? Allah is the one who created spouses from yourselves, for you, and placed between you love and mercy. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَالرَّحْمَةً. Allah mentions love as a creation, an element that should exist in society, and it's something desirable to be possessed. So love is not a bad thing, and love is not the opposite of religion. As a matter of fact, the idea of, for example, marriage, our Prophet promoted marriage. If you take a look at all of the seerah of all of the Ahlul Bayt, all of the Imams, can you find an Imam who was celibate? No. Can you find an Imam who wasn't married? No. Even Bibi Fatima, Bibi Zainab, best of women, married. Meaning that marriage and love are a good thing. There are hadith of our Prophet where he explains to us and says, telling your spouse that you love them, it stays in their heart forever. Talking about showing love and affection to your wife and to your children, as typically it's the men who try and shy away as a sign of their devotion to God, that, oh, love isn't a part of my life. No. The Prophet would say, no, love is from my attribute. And our Prophet was a very loving person who loved children, who loved his wives, who loved his family, and taught people to express love. As a matter of fact, a man who comes to the Prophet and is proud of the fact and says that in my life I have never shown love to a child, I've never kissed a child. The Prophet, after he leaves, says, to me, that would be someone who is a denizen of hell for this attribute of not loving children. So love is a big part of faith, and one of the Western ideological mistakes is that spirituality and faith exists outside of the bounds of love, and that love is a human limited attribute, and it has no place in the divine. Islam doesn't believe this. Islam believes that love and the attribute of love is a direct correlation between our relationship with Allah and our relationship with society, and that piety, spirituality doesn't grow without love. Now, the expressions of love and how we express love, that can be different on how society expects it to be done, but Islam doesn't have a problem with love. It's a good thing.
Okay. So as Muslims, what are some permissible expressions of love that one can perform with their partner?
Okay. So see, this is where it gets interesting, right? Societal expressions of love are very public, and very vocal and very outspoken. And they don't take into consideration mahramiyat, they don't take into consideration society and appropriateness. They don't look at anything else except for the desire of the self to be known and to know. So, for example, look, and being very honest about this, right? American society and society in general, humanity in general, without the guidance of Allah, doesn't know how to control the attributes that we possess, doesn't know how to manage all the things that Allah has given us, and which is why there's extremity and abuse in all things. We see gluttony, we see the opposite of that, anorexia. We see, for example, hypersexuality. We see, for example, asexuality. We see, for example, people who are abusive of their intellect and being overly clever, and others who are overly ignorant. Each of these is an abuse of the natural attributes that Allah gives us. So the same thing when it comes to emotion. There are those who, for example, are obsessively expressive in their emotion, and those who are obsessively negligent of any expression of emotion. Islam has a balance for all of these things. So, for example, if you try to look at Islam in the light of what society does, you're going to find that Islam and society are at odds. They don't agree. There's what we call ta'arud. There's conflict there. And if we try to normalize and say that Islam should allow what society likes, so society likes, for example, public displays of affection. Society likes vocal expressions of love. Society likes openly wearing your love on your sleeve and demonstrating to the world what's going on and being very affectionate and showy and being very emotional. Islam doesn't agree with any of those things. That's not Islam. Islam wants love to exist in the privacy and the bounds of a relationship between two people in their own private environment so that that emotionality has an outlet. And that's a good thing to have, but it's not uncontrolled in every environment, in every place and time. So, which is why showing love to your spouse, intimacy with your spouse in private, all these things acceptable. Every type of intimacy is permissible in Islam as long as the two are in agreement with each other, with exception. For example, and that gets into a very fiqhi, very particular conversation that talks about, for example, the ahkam of hayd and istihada and nifas, talks about, for example, some of these other limitations. But in general, Islam has allowed a husband and wife to express love to each other, but not publicly, not in the middle of society. That's not permissible. That's not, because why? It may be good for you, but it's bad for society. It can cause people, and that's what happens, right? One of the things that's happened is that this overly expressive public displays of affection and love and intimacy that have become normal have increased and caused a global rape culture to develop. That people feel that they have the right to express themselves even if the other person doesn't welcome that expression of love. Where does that come from? That comes from overstimulation. That comes from overexposure in an inappropriate environment. So what happens? Islam says don't do any of that, but in the privacy of your own home, with the respect to hijab, express all types of love with everybody, and that's fine. It's permissible.
So on the topic of love, love is a very strong feeling, especially for us humans, and it's something that can lead to most of us to marriage. Some of us, it can lead to other things. Should we love someone before marriage?
Ha. So if you take a look at the way Allah talks about it, right? Allah says that I created for you spouses amongst yourselves, and then I placed love and mercy between you. So Allah describes, and He says, I made marriage, and then I placed love, and I placed mercy. This description that comes to us tells us that, for example, the primary driver for finding a spouse is not love. Why? Love is an emotional connection that I can build with a human being, but I can also build it in appropriate places and I can build it in inappropriate places. When we talk about, for example, attraction is based upon a chemical reaction that exists within a human being, and naturally that chemical reaction that exists for a period of time, for up to about 2 years of a new relationship. You're having a chemical reaction at the approach of this individual, and after 2 years it shifts to where that chemical reaction dies out. Your body becomes immune to that process from this individual. And then what happens? Someone looks for a new outlet for that. So relationships that are purely based on love and emotion and attraction have a very short lifespan, and they constantly shift because you don't get the same dopamine hit, you don't get the same chemical hit as you were at the start of that relationship. So Islam says, no, that's not the way you build a relationship. Look at the attributes of the individual and if they suit you before the process of getting married. So for example, people used to look at wealth and they used to look at beauty. Our Prophet made a statement. He said, if you marry a spouse for their wealth and their beauty, Allah will make it that you find neither of these in them. He would give us instruction, تُخَيِّرُ لِنُطِفِكُمْ لِأَنَّ الْإِرْقَ دَسَّاسٌ. Be careful of who you choose as your spouse, because certainly the genetics and the family history will play a role. These instructions, our Prophet was telling us that the attributes you look for when finding someone to spend your life with is not love, is not beauty, is not, for example, physical material attributes, but rather look for something else. When we want to find out where do we grow our love and who do we want as a spouse, what we want to take a look at is, does that person share my hadaf, my goal, my purpose, what I want to achieve with my life? And if they do, then that's a place that I want to go and get married and develop love in that relationship. But if, for example, they don't, then yeah, I may think they're beautiful. I may think they're very attractive. I may think that they have great attributes. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to have a healthy relationship. It doesn't mean that that love is going to benefit me in my life and my existence. So which is why, look, the best thing that I can tell you is figure out what your goal in life is. If your goal in life is to be someone who's famous, find someone who wants to be famous. To be rich, find someone who wants to be rich. If your goal is to go to heaven, first find somebody who wants to go to heaven and then build a relationship with them that has love in it, as opposed to first saying, oh, I love this person, let me change everything about myself to be with them. That love is going to be a chemical reaction. It's not going to be the real love that you want to have.
Okay. So, as Muslims, is Valentine's Day permissible as an expression of love? And also, why do Muslims itself perform all these different expressions and promote Valentine's Day outside the borders of our religion?
So, look, culture as it exists, every society has its own culture. And every culture has some good things and it has some bad things. When you live in a society and you live in a culture, you naturally adopt the culture. And that's it. Us living in America now, the natural reaction is whatever Americans do, our kids, our families are going to want to do. It's natural. But the truth is you have to self-modify, and you have to have the intellectual ability to modify and understand what's a permissible expression, what's an impermissible expression. What are the attributes I want to possess? What are the ones that I don't? This idea, right? Valentine's Day and why it's promoted in this society is that it creates an impulse culture in society. In a Western capitalistic environment, you don't want educated customers because an educated customer doesn't waste money, isn't foolish with their purchases. But an emotional customer buys anything that you can make an emotional connection to. So society here, a capitalistic society from the top down, promotes emotionalism, promotes impulses, promotes, for example, irrational thought, because that makes you a good consumer. I can sell you anything then. So Valentine's Day exists to create and promote emotionalism in society. So if I can make you emotional about this person, I can make you emotional about this car, I can make you emotional about this toy, I can make you emotional about, and then I can exploit you and take advantage of you. That's where this comes from. Is it haram for me to participate in this? If, for example, I'm using this to express love to my family, to my children, to my spouse, and I'm doing it privately, there's nothing wrong with it. But look at the goal and the purpose. The goal and the purpose is not to give you an opportunity to express yourself. It's to manipulate you into being a more emotional consumer. So this is why culture promotes this. Why? Because from the top down, there's a push. It's a huge money-making opportunity that I promote this and I force you to buy all these things that you otherwise would not. Chocolates, flowers, things. There may be no other time in the year that you think it's worthwhile to spend this money. But what did I do? I forced you into an impulse-based situation to be emotional, to buy all these things, and I made money off of it. And I changed your consumer behavior from being an educated consumer to being an impulse and emotional consumer. That's where this comes from. If in spite of that, I can use it correctly and do it correctly, where, for example, it's an opportunity for me to express love for my family relations, there's nothing wrong with it. But that's not what it's intended to do, and that's not how most people use it. So it's something better to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
It has an ulterior motive behind it, and which is why, it's one of the things that it's referred to as like a Hallmark holiday.
Okay.
The card companies invented this. It wasn't just the card companies. It was a capitalistic environment that created this system to be able to create a particular type of consumer, which is why it exists in this side of the world, which is a capitalistic country, and other countries that don't identify as capitalistic or purely capitalistic environments don't have holidays like this. It doesn't exist on the other side of the world because it wasn't good for society.
Hmm. One last question, Sheikh, and this is outside the topic of Valentine's Day. As Muslims, we show love to a lot of predominant figures in Islamic history, right? We obviously show our love to people like Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the rest of the Imams, even Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Allah Himself. What are some permissible ways of expression that we can show love to these figures in our religion?
Well, okay. Having an emotional connection to Ahlul Bayt, having an emotional connection to Allah is all good. For example, even the idea that the Imam says if you have a dua that you want accepted, cry when you make dua and inshallah it'll be accepted. That emotion is good. Crying in the love of Allah is good. Crying when you're asking Allah and you're doing talab al-haja is a very good thing. Showing love, for example, the Ahlul Bayt. The Imam explains himself, Shi'atuna yafrahuna bifarhina wa yahzanuna bihuznina. Our Shia are those who are happy when we're happy and sad when we're sad. The importance of that statement is to understand that the Imam is never happy or sad for himself. He is happy or sad for the sake of Allah. So when, for example, I attach myself and my happiness is happy when my Imam is happy, and when I'm sad when my Imam is sad, is appreciating that these are moments that Allah is pleased with or Allah is displeased with, and building that connection. So these are all great ways of expressing, and same thing, shahadat, wiladat, these Eid, the ayat that we possess, whether that's a 15 Shaban, whether that's a Eid Ghadir, whether that's Eid Mubahila, whether that's Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, are all great ways of expressing love and happiness and attachment to the sake of Allah. And same way, days like Ashura, days like Arba'in, days like the 21st of Ramadan, being sad in those times, being frustrated and upset at those events that have taken place in history is a good thing that we establish these cultures and practices, and it's a good expression of love.
Thanks so much, Sheikh Bilal, for answering these questions.
Good times.
That's it for today's Shia City podcast. Until next time.